This is 11564 South County Road 775 West in Reelsville, Indiana. It's April 5th, 2004. This is Joe Raab and his wife Glo. His birthday is December 1st, 1923. He was in World War II. He was in the Army, and his highest rank was Sergeant 4. His particular activities was the Ordnance and the 70th Infantry. And my name is Carrie Williams, and the camera operator is my mother, Sharon Williams. Okay. How old were you when you went into the Army?
I was 19, I think.
Okay. Were you terrified?
No, not really, but when you're drafted, nobody, I don't think, really, cherished the idea to go.
Where were you living at the time?
At 11564 South County Road, 775 West, Reelsville, Indiana.
And why did you join?
Well, I was drafted. Didn't have much of a choice.
Why did you pick the service branch you joined?
Well, I didn't think I wanted anything to do with the water. And so that's why I thought the Army would be the best bet.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Yes, I do.
What were they like?
Well, I was on KP the first day I was in service, and learned a lesson right off the bat, because it was on Saturday night, and we were making sausage patties for the next morning's breakfast. And of course, the mess sergeant, he said, so many patties on each platter. Well, we started patting sausage patties, and of course, as the longer it went, the more we started to cheat, because we'd make them a little bigger and make more patties, so we'd get done quicker. Well, it didn't work. When he came in and he counted the patties, he dumped them all back out on the table, and it was all to do over again. So I learned right off that, if you had a job to do, you better do it right.
Okay, tell me about your boot camp training experiences.
Well, it was at Aberdeen, Maryland, at the Proving Grounds, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And I had my basic training there, and then went across the road to the technical section and took the technical training in automotive vehicle mechanics, and of course had a spec for, to work on military vehicles, all vehicles. And then that's what I was shipped overseas as a replacement in the Ordnance. And then I went overseas in May of '44 and landed at Liverpool, England, and then wound up down to Tidworth, England, in the Tidworth Army base there, and was stationed there. And since there wasn't any demand for mechanics in base shops, why, of course, couldn't get a rating, and when they made the breakthrough, they took all of the fellows in the Ordnance in that area and put them in shipped them across the channel in the infantry. And from there, I was sent right up on the front lines. And then in February of '45, why, the first time I was wounded was the 22nd day of February by a potato masher grenade, which is a concussion grenade. That's the purpose of it. And part of the canister, when it exploded right out after it had been thrown in our foxhole, I grabbed it in time, as luck would happen, and tossed it about out, and it went off in midair, and part of the canister went in my heel, and so I had to go back to the base medical center, and they taken that out. And of course, anytime you had a flesh wound, that heals pretty fast, and you know that you've got to go back. So it was a couple of days, and I was back up on the front lines again. And then the 25th of February, right after that, why, 10 days to the day that my dad was killed. Well, I was wounded the same day of February that he was killed, only mine was 10 years later. And after that, why, I was sent to the station hospital, and from there to the 3rd General Hospital in France, and then spent, well, I don't know how long was there. When did I come back to the States? In 45. I think it was. Anyways, when I got back to the States, why, I went to Nichols General Hospital down at Louisville, because the piece of shrapnel that's in that shadow box had cut into the bone in my leg and cut the peroneal nerve, had shattered it. And they sent me down there for neurosurgery. But when I got to Louisville and they examined me, they thought they might do more damage to try to correct that nerve than to let it go, and they thought maybe in about 30 years I might get the feeling back in my foot. So from there I went to Foster General Hospital then in Jackson, Mississippi, and spent the rest of the time there until I recuperated from and was able to walk again. And then they sent us to Florida to recuperate on Miami Beach for a week, and from there then I was sent to Washington, D.C., and I served the rest of my time in the station hospital at Fort Myer, Virginia, as a clerk typist in the hospital. And then I left to come home and was discharged from Aberdeen, Maryland in April of 46. Glad to get home.
Sounds like it. And you served in World War I?
Two.
Where exactly did you go?
When I left, well, just, to Aberdeen, Maryland for my, well, of course, Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis for the, the recruiting till you're shipped out to where you're going to go through your basic training.
Okay, do you remember arriving?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like?
Well, it wasn't too bad. I knew I was in the service, and I intended to make the best of it, because that was my duty, was to, do a good job.
Did you see combat?
Yes, I did.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
A lot of them. In fact, when I was wounded, my buddy was killed right next to me. He and I just exchanged places, and there was a burst of a German 88 artillery that bursted right above our foxhole, and he was killed immediately, and I got it in the leg there.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Well, I think the ones when I was probably scared the most is when we were trapped in that foxhole on an outpost, and the vegetation, the trees, tops had just been cut off by the German machine gun fire, and we couldn't get out. And that the lieutenant told me, when I asked him why we didn't get some help or they didn't try to get us out, he said that they couldn't risk a whole outfit for two felons. So, but we were lucky we got out.
Were you a prisoner of war?
No.
Tell me about your experiences in captivity and when that was. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
No, just outside the 2 Bronze Stars and the Purple Heart.
Okay, and how did you get them?
They were presented to me. Of course, the Purple Heart was in a box. Of course, you probably saw those boxes that they come in.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Just by letters.
What was the food like?
It wasn't bad.
For him to be as particular as he was.
Well, you have to make the best of it. I remember when we left Le Havre, France, we were transported up through Belgium and plumb up around and then back down to outside of Saarbrücken. And it was in a refrigeration car with no, a door to open, but of course it was way below 0 weather and snow was on. And the sea rations in the cans, why, of course, when you'd open them up, why, the lard in there was just as white as snow because it was as cold as could be. And you can imagine what it tasted like. And any time anybody had to relieve themselves, you just had to go to the door and open it up because the train never did stop, only of a night, because being strafed, by German planes overhead where they could see them. And of course, when we'd stopped, when they'd served chow, why, it was always of a night. And it was some experience, but a person lived through it. Sometimes I don't see how, by sleeping in trenches with piling brace in on top of the water to keep you up out of the water. And you didn't sleep, of course, you just sat up because there's no way you're going to go to sleep when you're on the front lines because you're going to stay awake. And of course then you never get to wash, you never get to shave. And I always remember the night I was operated on, it was 1 o'clock in the morning because I was hit at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was 1 o'clock the next morning before they were able to operate because the time they got us out of the woods and back to the hospital. And I remember lying there, and I said to the nurse, of course she was just as white as snow, her uniform and everything, and we were just as dirty as could be. And the gymnasium that we were in, the litters were so thick on the floor, it was just side by side with wounded people. There was just, and when they were going to operate, I said, well, you're going to put me to sleep, aren't you? And she said, yes. She said, why don't you just start counting sheep? I never will forget it. And I think 3 is, that's all I remember. And when she turned the pentothal on, put me to sleep. And of course, then the next morning when I woke up and I had this piece of gauze on my wrist, I thought, well, what in the world's that for? And when the nurse talked to her, she said, well, that's what we've taken out of your leg this morning. And she said, I thought you'd want it for a souvenir.
That was nice, wasn't it, to do?
So I wrapped it up in a $1 bill that my mother had sent me because there wasn't any use for her to send it to me because I couldn't use it. So I wrapped it up in there, and it was still wet enough from that gauze that it rusted. There was rust on the $1 bill, but now when that went in, that was hot, off of the red hot. And it went in a swirl. So you can imagine what damage, how much of the bone had taken out.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Yes, we did.
And did you
The
feel...
Red Cross always gave us 1 donut.
Did you feel pressure or stress?
Well, I was able to cope with it pretty well because I don't know. And the thing about it is you don't know what you're getting into. That's the thing about it. You don't know what's going to happen. Because I'll be honest with you, if I had to do over again, I'd be a lot smarter because I'd know what I was getting into. And I'd play it just safe,
Was there something special you did for good luck?
I don't know, it was good luck, but did a lot of praying. And don't know, you believe me, I've heard guys that you would never think that there was a breath of prayer in them, but you should have heard them praying when it got hot.
How did folks entertain themselves?
Well, when I was in Tidworth, well, Glo can show you how I entertained myself.
I can. Do you want to see what he made me?
And
I do know.
what I would do, I'd take an English coins, and I took my buck tent peg, wooden peg, and put a dent in the steel helmet. And then I laid those coins on that dent in the steel helmet and put a candle in underneath them, because you see we were in tents in England. Of course you couldn't have any lights of any kind. And I put a candle in underneath it and heated that, and they sent me a little solder I laid those coins on there, and then I got the sterling dog tag chains and laid strands on there and put the solder on them and soldered them and made little bracelets for Glo. She'll show you. And then I sold some to, well, one of my lieutenants, he wanted one, and another one wanted one. But that's the way I passed my time. And of course the way I pressed my clothes was I'd go to the mess hall and I'd get cardboard boxes, and I'd lay them on my cot in the tent and lay my pants on that layer, and then put another layer of cardboard on top of that, and then sleep on it. And that's the way I pressed my pants and my uniform, because I was kind of particular, as I wanted my uniform to always look nice. And
This necklace, I make a little change.
these, I fouled all of those out of those coins.
I'm going to try to zoom
See,
in
there's
on
the
that.
heart
Scoot them over here so I can
and the
see.
spade and those are threepenny bits there, the English coins.
I'll get a little necklace chain untangled here.
And then this was filed out of a shilling, and the rest of them were what was it?
Threepenny bits, you said.
Oh, these are threepenny bits.
He had to, those are a lot of coins too that he.
But I filed all of those out of coins. Glo's got one big one. Or was that mine?
That's yours.
That had the full, the full big
Where
coin.
yours is.
But that's where I passed away a lot of my time in Tidworth there.
Did you send those to me for Christmas?
I don't remember those. And then 2 years, was it 2 years ago that Jerry, I came in one evening and Glo said, "Are you ready to go to Europe?" And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, we're going to go because Terry's already made the plans." And so we went to Europe, and I got to go back to Tidworth where I was stationed.
Yeah, we went down
50,
there.
what was it, 55 years ago. And it was really neat. You know, of course I couldn't recognize anything because but it was, and hopefully someday we'll maybe go back to La Havre where I landed in France, and then go across to right outside of Saarbrücken, well, at Saarbrücken to where I was wounded.
What did you do when you were on leave?
Nothing over there. I mean, there wasn't anything to do. I mean, when I was in England, the first time when we landed at Liverpool, there was a skating rink at Manchester, and we went there, a roller skating rink. And what it was slabs of metal welded, the seams were welded together. And can you imagine roller skating on metal with seams? You just click, click, click every time you go across. And because that's the way Glo and I met, was at a skating rink, and that was a big thing during our era, was roller skating, wasn't it? And that's the way we met.
we were skating, not together. I was skating and he was skating on, he was on the outside looking in then. He said, "Hey, Blondie, if I come in, will you skate with me?"
I think she called to me first, though. I think.
He knows better than that. He's just things stuck on himself.
Well, apparently it worked.
Anyway, that was in the first date we had, we went to what used to, out there at the 40 where that, used to be Miami Gardens. Do you remember where that is? We went up there and got a Coke, you know. You didn't have much money spent on you when you had dates back then, you know. Everybody expects you out for dinners and all sorts of things now, but then we did well to go out and have Coke.
Where did you travel while you were in the service?
Well, when I was at Tidworth, a buddy of mine from New York, he and I went to Bournemouth, which is right on the coast, just a little piece from Southampton, and it was a real summer resort where a lot of people went. And he and I went there one weekend, and when woke up the next morning, he asked me, he said, "Joe," he said, "I bet you can't guess what's outside." And good night, when I went to the window and looked out, we were right on the English Channel, our hotel was right on that channel. Well, then another time, he and I went to London, and then one other time, a friend of mine by the name of Bob Ripley, it was Bob S. Ripley, not the Robert S. Ripley that was so famous, but his name was Bob Ripley, and he was married, and we went to London on pass, and he liked to drink an awful lot, and I didn't. And anyways, we went in a pub, and when we got ready to leave, why, he told those Englishmen that I was a prize fighter before I come into service back here in the United States, and good night, I only weighed 146 pounds. Of course, they believed him, and I felt like a fool. And then when we got on the subway, of course, that's the first time we'd ever been on the subway, both of us. And I got on and he didn't get on. Well, there are two GIs in London and not knowing what to do or anything. Well, the next stop it made, I got off and I heard somebody saying, "Joe Raab, Joe." And it was him trying to find me, so he caught up with me, and then we went to Westminster Abbey, but that's about the only thing we saw that weekend was Westminster Abbey. And then the other time the Apco fellow from New York and he and I went, I was telling both when we were over this last time when we went through Andover, England, both of us went to sleep on the train and didn't get off where we were supposed to, and we had to turn around and get on the train and go back to get off at Andover. But anyways, it was a wonderful experience.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
Well, about the only thing, a fellow that was in my tent, of course we were all R's, alphabetically, but his name was Mike Ray, and this Bob Ripley, he would always go down to Shipton Bellinger, which was a little pub there at Tidworth. Every night he'd go down there and have some bitters, Well, when he'd come back, as he'd come down through the tent, he'd keep hollering, "Joe Raab, Joe Raab," because when I'd answer him, he'd know which tent he was supposed to come in because he'd been... Well, this Mike Ray was bald-headed, and he always slept with... Have you saw those little brown beanies that they wore in underneath our helmets? Well, he always slept with one of those on his head of a night because his head would get cold. And Bob, when he'd come in, he'd go in just to aggravate Mike. He'd say, "Boy, I got to kiss that bald head before I go to sleep." And oh, it would make Mike Ray so mad that he would just lay into him. But, it was just all humor. It was a lot of fun. But Ripley didn't have very much pride. I'd hate for this to be printed and he'd hear me say that, but he didn't. He didn't have too much pride. But he was a good fellow, and I felt sorry for him because, and one night before we left England, he was really sad. And he said the lights had went out. And he said to me, he said, Joe, he said, would you do me a favor? And I said, well, what was that? And what was it he wanted me to sing from the movie of,
Sing?
yeah, you know, from John Wayne and, or John Payne, and You'll Never Know.
Oh, you'll never know. Oh, now
And
it's
he
Friday.
wanted me to sing that. And you could have heard a pin drop in the barracks that night because everybody was sad, you know. And so I did. But it's, you know, there's just, I don't know, sad occasion. Of course, Ripley was married, you know, and of course he was really sad.
Did you guys ever pull any pranks on anybody?
Mm-hmm.
What were they?
Well, of course, in the general hospital, nobody could walk, you know. And the people that could walk, why, we would take and put a water bottle down at the end of the bed, you know, and then when they'd come in, anybody would come in, why, that after they'd been to the bathroom on crutches and come back, and then when they'd pull that sheet to pull it up over, you know, they'd pull the stopper out of that water bottle. And of course,
Where they thought of all these.
they would get wet then. And then another time when we were going overseas, we had one fellow that he would ask you for, he'd ask you for anything. And so everybody knew that, you know, they just didn't like Benny too well. But anyways, he was on the upper berth of the bunk in the ship. And so they cut the ropes on the upper bunk. And when he come in to lay down, you know, of course, after he turned over a couple of times while the rope slid off, and of course he went down to the bottom. I was on the top bunk, and there wasn't enough room to even roll over between the structure of the ship, you know, because you had to have everything on your bunk, everything, your helmet and your duffel bag and everything, because there's so many troops on that George Washington ship going over that you had to have everything on your bunk. Well, you didn't have much room, and especially on the top, you were right up against the structure of the ship. You couldn't hardly turn over because you used your helmet, laid your head back in your helmet for a pillow, and dug some holes with your pillow too, or your helmet too, when you was on the front lines and you were in trouble, just to get your head in. You thought you could protect your head and forget about everything else.
What did you think of officers or fellow soldiers?
Oh, I thought they were all just fine. The only thing about when you fellas that just became first lieutenant or second lieutenants, it did kind of go to their head. And, you know, when you went on past, they expected you to salute them, you know, and because they wanted to be noticed. And but I'll tell you, when they got up on the front lines, they didn't even want their insignia, like their bars or anything, to show. Of course, you know why? Because they wanted to get whoever was in command right off the bat, you know. And that's why we always thought, well, you know, that, I guess that was all right, but it didn't set with enlisted men too well. But all in all, I had good officers. I really did. I couldn't complain about any of them.
Did you keep a personal diary?
Up to a point that when we got on the front lines, there was no,
But it was just that little ivory.
yeah, there was nothing you could do up there. That was the least on your mind. You just hoped and prayed that you got back home.
Can you go ahead and tell me about that?
Well, of course, that's my dog tags down there in the corner. Of course, that's, and this memo pad up there is a fellow that, a neighbor of ours before I went into service, brought it down to me. He didn't have any family. Kenny's wife didn't, and he wanted to know if I'd take that through World War II. And it had been through the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, and World War I, and he wanted me to take it to World War II. And that's got it's got 7 sheets in there that you unfold them, and they're labeled Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and all days of the week. And you can write on it and then erase it. And so I didn't take it overseas because I was afraid that I'd never, I'd never have it after that. And this watch here was my grandpa's. That's got 2 solid backs in front and 2 solid backs in the back, and you wind it with a key. That's real old. And then, of course, this is my Purple Heart, and this is a piece of shrapnel that they'd taken out of my leg.
After the service, where did you go? Did you just go back home, or?
Came back home, and I was going to farm because I'd farmed some before I went in, but you couldn't get a tractor unless you had to wait, and I got a priority to get a tractor, and got a tractor and started to farm, and wound up farming the rest of my life.
Okay, so you worked, and did you not go to college or anything? Did you make any close friends while you were in the service?
Oh, a lot of friends.
Did you still?
Yeah, I'd just like to know what happened to some of the fellows that had a lot of friends.
And
And,
we still hear from some of
yeah,
them,
I
too.
still hear from some, and let's see, 2.
Yeah, one in Colorado.
No,
Yeah, they aren't, they're not,
Nebraska.
well, they lived in Nebraska, but
Yeah, they're in Colorado now.
Um,
But no, one of my buddies that was in the 3rd General Hospital with me over in France, we contacted each other, and mainly the wives go, and his wife did, and then several years ago, we went to out west on a trip, cherry taking, Glo and I, and so we got in touch with his wife, and she suggested that we surprise him. So she made arrangements for us to meet at the Holiday Inn right off of 70.
Sunday dinner.
Sunday dinner at Ogallala. That's where he lived in Nebraska, and so he came at noon, and he was really surprised. We've got all that on video, though, when we met there. We had dinner and then went back to their home, and she had things all set up like everything from World War II, and it was really neat. They've been planning to come and see us, but neither one of them are very well. So.
And then Keitlinger had the lumber company.
Yeah, and then another friend of mine,
We saw him.
Norman Keitlinger at Hutchinson, Kansas. They have a lumber company. It's been in their family all those years, and we went to see him, and he came to see me right after he got out of service because he came to the 500 race at Indianapolis, and we had him down for dinner, and then we taken him back to Indianapolis. And but he isn't very well at all now because when we stopped to see him, he's not in good health at all.
And then you had one in Kentucky.
Yeah,
Reynolds,
correspondent
we've seen
one
him.
in Kentucky that's been up to see me. And yeah, you meet a lot of good friends. I'd just like to know. I don't suppose there's too many of them living. Because,
My husband's 80.
most of them was, most of the people that, was older than I was.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Well,
Just that you knew you didn't want to stay in.
yes, I know. I was asked to stay in, and make a career of it. But I mean, you just after so long, you just want to get back home. But I would, you know, this war that we're in right now, if we had been attacked, if I had been physically able, I would have gone in a minute. But I would have been very reluctant to get in this war that we're in now, just on speculation that we were going to be attacked, because we weren't attacked, and I just don't think that we should be where we're at now. I don't know how other people feel about it, but I just feel like that it could wind up that it's going to be a lost cause completely, and a lot of lives lost, because it just went over the 600 mark this past weekend of lives being lost. And I'm afraid that we may not, because we're dealing in a territory over there, a very religious territory, that those people, they don't give up. And I'm just afraid. But we just hope for the best. That's all you can do, and time will tell.
What did you think of Hitler?
Oh, I just think that he just, you know, you can tell what all he did, you know, that, and the way that he just wanted to conquer the world. That's all he wanted to do. He started out in Poland, and he was going, and it's a good thing that I always did say that it was a blessing that Russia went with the United States at the end of the war, or we could have still been in trouble.
What did you think of the atomic bomb?
Well, it saved a lot of lives, and it took a lot of lives. I'll just put it that way. It saved a lot, and it took a lot.
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
Well, it made me appreciate things, being in a foreign country and see older women that would come to our garbage barrel from our mess after we'd had mess and scrape grease, anything they could get their hands on. It made you feel like what a good country we've got, and you know that we should really appreciate it a lot more than we do, because I tell you, we just can't be thankful enough that we live in America. That's all there is to it.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered? Okay. And thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you.
You're more than welcome.
So I think you did an excellent
I do
job.
too.
I think you really did. You were very professional.